welcome everybody to I believe our closing event for what has been a very exciting first day of the Equity Conference. You always close with the best, so we have Tre'Vell Anderson for our session, Something Light. But it's going to be something hilarious and something informative as well. Tre'Vell Anderson is an award-winning journalist, social curator, and world changer who always comes to slay and is already doing that. Formerly the director of culture and entertainment at Out Magazine and a film reporter with the Los Angeles Times, they have dedicated their career to centering those who live in the margins and in the gray spaces, and at the intersections of life through a pop culture lens, which is what I love. It's my work I love to do. We will be enjoying an opportunity to, Tre'Vell has 2 books, which is getting that work in. But we will be focusing on their story from We See Each Other, a personal history of trans visibility since the beginning of moving images. We are very excited to hear that. I will introduce myself and introduce my co-moderator, and then we will go through our collective practices as we do for all CFA events. I'm Dr. Tracy Salisbury. I am the Department Chair of Ethnic Studies at Cal State Bakersfield. I also am the co-chair of the CFA Black Caucus, and I am very, very excited to be doing this session. So I'll move on to my good friend, my sister in union, Diane Blair, and let her introduce herself. You're muted, Diane.
Okay, I think you can hear me now, yes? Okay, good. All right, well, good evening. I am Diane Blair, and I'm a professor of communication at Fresno State and your CFA secretary. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a white cisgender woman in my mid-50s with shoulder-length reddish-brown hair, wearing a magenta sweater with a white collar, and occasionally you may see me with my reading glasses on.
Thank you, Diane. I didn't identify myself properly for those of us in the audience. I am a Black woman with salt and pepper dreads. I wear glasses. They're a color blue this current time, and I'm rocking black, which is my favorite color. I am what we call light skin, red bone with a little rouge to give away my Southern roots. But we will get started with our practices. First, we'll do the land acknowledgement, which is my duty, and I will start. We want to acknowledge that we gather as the California Faculty Association on the traditional land of the California Indian people, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it through the generations. This calls us to commit to learning how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit as well. To recognize land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on, and a way of honoring the indigenous people who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It is important to understand the long history that has brought us to reside on the land of the California Indian people, and to seek and to understand our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. The California Indian people are very much a part of today's California, living and working and caring for the land as they have always done. Acknowledging the land is an important indigenous protocol, and that we are honoring here today. Thank you. Diane, you want to go ahead?
Sure. And so I am zooming in from the traditional homelands of the Yokuts and Mono peoples. And our next opening practice is to center ourselves. So we want to take a few moments to center ourselves. I'm sure our day has been busy, and centering helps us come together as a group and focus our attention on the current moment. We invite you to do this by taking some full breaths into the count of 4, and then also exhaling to the count of 4. And as you do that, I'm going to read a quote from Audre Lorde's essay titled "The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action" for our reflection during this centering. So go ahead and take your first breath in. Each of us is here now because in one way or another, we share a commitment to language and to the power of language and to the reclaiming of that language which has been made to work against us. In the transformation of silence into language and action, it is vitally necessary for each one of us to establish or examine our function in that transformation and to recognize our roles as vital within that transformation. Let's take one final breath in together and exhale. And another opening practice for our union that reflects our commitment to solidarity with each other is our CFA interruption practice statement. As a part of our continuing commitment to racial justice work, when we experience examples of racial narratives, racism, or whiteness in our meetings, or as we conduct our business, we will address it. This means we can interrupt the meeting and draw the issue to one another's attention. We will do this kindly, with care, and in good faith. Further, as we engage interruptions, we will take an intersectional approach, reflecting the fact that white supremacy and racism operate in tandem with interlocking systems of oppression, of colonialism, racial capitalism, class, cis heteropatriarchy, and ableism. This statement is a reminder that we commit to do this in the service of ending the system of racial oppression.
All
And
right.
so
Go
thanks.
ahead, Diane.
Yeah, I was just gonna say up next, I believe, is our wonderful staff member, Kiki, who is part of the vital staff that's part of what makes for a successful conference. And she is gonna share some session logistics with you. And then Tracy will take us back to introduce our presenter for the evening.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Tre'Vell. So excited to be here. Just going to read a few little logistics for your evening today. Thank you so much for joining us for this wonderful session. Just a friendly note to please update your Zoom name to reflect your full name, pronouns, and your campus. We wanted to offer that closed captioning and American Sign Language services are being provided here today. To turn on your closed captioning, you may activate by clicking the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen, and then click Show Subtitle to view those captions. Our ASL interpreters will be spotlighted throughout the webinar for us, along with our speakers. The chat and raise hand features will be disabled, but the Q&A feature will be enabled for you. Please note that this session will be recorded and posted at a later date to our CFA YouTube page and our Council for Racial Social Justice webpage. The audience, any audience interaction portion of equity sessions will not be recorded. So check out our equity conference landing page. I will post that in chat. It's already been posted. I will be posting it again because all this information will be posted throughout and more helpful bits will be found at our equity conference landing page. And lastly, just wanted to mention that we will be having, and very excited to announce, a book giveaway today. You'd be one of, I'm going to post it in chat after these logistics here, be one of the first 25 people to click on the link I'll be posting, and you will get a free copy of We See Each Other, a Black trans journey through TV and film. We will notify you by email if you are one of those lucky 25. And if you are not one of the first 25 to submit the form and click the link, you will receive a 10% off coupon for your book order, and that will be posted in chat as well. And I will also be posting an audiobook giveaway that Tre'Vell has blessed us with. And I will be posting that link in chat. And the first person to click on that and submit a response will receive a free code for Spotify. So we got 2 for today. So I will be posting them in the chat, and you better click and see what you can get. All right, back to you, Diane and Tracy. Thank you all. Have a good session.
All right, we are going to get to it. We are not going to hold back and give Tre'Vell Anderson the front and center of our attention and the stage. Listen, everybody, I'm gonna tell you, this is a golden opportunity to learn about film and television on 2 worlds I really love. And I love how Tre'Vell tells their story through these mediums. So let's have a good time, have some fun. We got the best closer we could have for today. So let's go for it. And Tre'Vell, are you ready?
Oh, I was born ready,
All right. Well, we are going
as
to
you
get
know.
off stage and let you take over. We'll see you at the Q&A.
Thank y'all so much for being here, for welcoming me. I'm so excited to be here to tell a little bit about my story, to talk a little bit about trans representation, to talk a little bit about trans joy and what we all can be doing to make greater space for our communities. I am going to share my screen here. Let's hope I do this correctly. There we go. I believe y'all should be good to go there. And so I had the fabulous opportunity to publish a book last year called We See Each Other, a Black Trans Journey Through TV and Film. And part of that journey with the book was about wanting to tell more of our stories, our histories, particularly as it's shown up in film and television, but I wasn't able to cover everything in the book. And so I ended up doing this limited series podcast with a fellow Black trans journalist, Sharjah Seld, called We See Each Other, the podcast. And I love that we started this space kind of setting the intention, taking a breath, because I like to do the same before I talk to folks. And so I want you to take a listen to this song. This song is the theme song for We See Each Other, the podcast. And it really, for me, sets the tone for the type of conversation I want to have with you all today, and what I hope you all can take away from it.
Generations of history. I'm so glad that we can see the beauty of our stories told by our own. What a joyful time to see community shine. We see each other. We see each other. We see each other. We see each other.
That wonderful track was put together by Never Ending Nina, who's a fabulous singer-songwriter who also happens to be a Black trans woman. And when she says at the beginning, I think really hits me in my core. She says, generations of history, I'm so glad that we can see the beauty of our stories told by our own. I realized I forgot to do my description, introduction. I'm Tre'Vell Anderson. I use they, them pronouns. I am a fabulous, beautiful cocoa goddess, okay? I have a sort of kind of Afro moment going. It's giving used paintbrush, you know? And I am wearing a red sleeveless cardigan vest. Generations of history, I'm so glad that we can see the beauty of our stories told by our own. When it comes to trans visibility, trans history, I like to start conversations with the beginning of what media has called the transgender tipping point, right? So this was back in 2014. Laverne Cox was doing her thing on Orange is the New Black. And she found herself on the cover of Time magazine in this article written by Katie Steinmetz. That was June of 2014. About a year later, Caitlyn Jenner, famous, Kardashian parent, Olympian, came out, declared her truth on the cover of Vanity Fair magazine, "Call me Caitlyn." And from that moment, we set off into what I consider to be a historic moment for the visibility of our community as trans folks, right? So you end up having a film like Tangerine, where it stars Kiki Rodriguez and Maya Taylor. It becomes the first film to stage an Oscars campaign for trans actors in history. That's July 2015. Fast forward a few years, we get Zeke Smith. If any of you watch Survivor out there, you will remember him being outed on national television by one of his competitors as a trans man and presented as being, deceitful because he decided not to disclose that information. Andrea Jenkins becomes the first Black openly trans woman elected to public office in the United States. We have a film like Una Mujer Fantástica, a fantastic woman that, goes on to be recognized at the Academy Awards. It stars Daniela Vega, a trans woman playing a trans woman. We fast forward, we see a TV show like Transparent on Amazon Prime go through allegations of sexual misconduct with its cisgender lead, Jeffrey Tambor, who was playing a trans character. And we have this landmark moment that starts in 2018, ends up ending in the middle of the pandemic in 2021 with Pose, this legendary, iconic television show that had the largest transgender cast ever for a scripted series. The show also led to Janet Mock, one of its writers, becoming the first Black trans writer on a series. This is in 2018. Fast forward a couple years, we have a film like Disclosure. Disclosure is a documentary on Netflix streaming right now. If you have not seen it, please do check it out. Directed by Sam Feder, executive produced by Laverne Cox, that explores the history of trans representation on screen since the beginning of moving images. I had the opportunity to participate in that documentary. It was historic for being the first documentary about trans people exclusively produced and featuring trans folks. My favorite show on television right now premiered in July of 2020, P-Valley. I hope y'all are watching. Down in the valley where the girls get naked. I hope so, okay? It is a fabulous show by Katori Hall with Miko Anand as its lead, playing the character of Uncle Clifford, who is this non-binary diva and mother hen to the sex workers at the Pank. 2021, trans masculine representation in particular hits a new level with Elliot Page declaring himself to the world, followed by Brian Michael Smith, who with his role on Fox's 911 Lone Star became the first Black trans man to have a series regular role on television. He made history a year later. This fabulous photo here that you see is from his People magazine Sexiest Man Alive shoot, the first Black trans man to be on that list. And then we find ourselves at the end of 2023 at the Tonys, where the fabulous non-binary actors Alex Newell and Jay Harrison Yee become the first non-binary people to win Tonys for acting. Both of them were nominated in male categories. This is our historic, legendary visibility that often, feels like we're shoving ourselves down folks' throat because they're just not used to us claiming this space. And I think it's really interesting, right, that this is the perception that we as trans folks are shoving ourselves down people's throats when this is just our history over the last 10 years, right? And at the same time that we've had this historic visibility of our culture, we've also been navigating historic ills as a community. Under the Trump administration, many attempts were made to define trans people out of existence. The violence on our community was so bad, right, that the American Medical Association declared it an epidemic. And finally, being able to have data that tracks our lives as trans folks, we discovered the murders of trans people nearly doubled over the course of 4 years from 2018 to 2022. It was Black trans women and femmes who were most at risk, who are most at risk. And so we have this historic cultural moment in visibility happening, right? At the same time that we as a community are experiencing unprecedented levels of violence. In the midst of that, one moment that is important for me to highlight and note is the Brooklyn Liberation March that happened in June of 2020. We all know what happened in 2020. That pandemic will forever change our lives. It also was a moment where so many folks were going through their racial reckonings. And at a time when folks were saying the names George Floyd and saying the names Breonna Taylor, a group of activists, many of them Black trans people in New York City, noticed that very few people were saying the name of Tony McDade, who was a Black trans man who was also killed by police under questionable circumstances, to say lightly, in Florida. They got together and they organized this mass demonstration of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in Brooklyn, all dressed in white. They were dressed in white, inspired by an NAACP march that had happened many decades earlier. And there's one moment, one refrain that sticks out in my mind that I hope will have the same impact for you as it had for me.
So I'm gonna ask you to do a little labor right now. Repeat after me. I believe in my power. Now, y'all gonna have to be louder than that. We got a lot of souls to reach right now, don't we? I believe in my power. I believe in my power. I believe in your power. I believe in your power. I believe in our power. I believe in our power. I believe in Black trans power. I believe in Black trans power. Y'all gonna say it with me again? Yeah. I believe in my power. I believe in my power. I believe in your power. I believe in your power. I believe in our power. I believe in our power. I believe in Black trans power. I believe in Black trans power. All right, y'all getting warmed up. We doing one more again. We're gonna do it one more again. In my power. I believe in my power. I believe in your power. I believe in your power. I believe in our power. I believe in our power. I believe in Black trans power. I believe in Black trans power. Thank you.
So for those of you who don't know who that is Raquel Willis. She is a fabulous journalist and author. She just had her memoir come out recently. It's called The Risk It Takes to Bloom. And it's this moment from the Brooklyn Liberation March that most often comes to my mind in this moment, particularly for the goosebumps that it gives me. To see and to witness, right? These thousands of people proclaiming the power of Black trans folks, standing up and saying that Black trans lives matter. And then it's also very sobering, right, for me at the same time to also realize and note that it is the violence against us as a community that ended up bringing these people out here in the first place. And so when we think about what we are experiencing on the visibility front, and what we are experiencing in our everyday communities, the reality becomes, right, that trans visibility is a paradox. It is rich in positivity and so many benefits and so much opportunity, much of which that just never makes it down to the everyday trans people in our communities already, right? The reality being then that visibility without protection is just another form of violence, right? And it's a type of violence that is not only contemporary in terms of what we are experiencing, but it is also historical. The ways that trans and gender expansive people have been rendered on screen in time before now matter, right? In how we think and move through the world, and especially when it comes to our lived experiences. And so for me, I like to take, for example, the beginning of film and television, modern filmmaking as we know it. That is an honor that we are often bestowing upon one D.W. Griffith and Birth of a Nation. Gone with the Wind, also an early example that we lift up, right, as an industry, as a culture of great storytelling. These both are racist depictions, some would say white supremacist depictions of what life could be like and was like for us as Black folks. These are types of images, right, that are at the very root of many of the violences that we as Black folks experience in the world. But when it comes to the storytelling that's out there about trans folks, right, we often find ourselves having to look to these early cross-dressed characters as early signs of, gender transgression in culture at a time before we had transgender, right, as a label to describe folks. And on screen, we can actually go back further than The Birth of a Nation to look at that, right? One of the earliest moving pictures, this is a silent film from 1901 called Old Maid Having Her Picture Taken. And the whole point of the movie is there is this ugly woman that is so ugly that everything in this photo studio keeps breaking, and she is not able to take the photo. Now, we consider this to be one of the earliest images of gender expansiveness on screen because that woman character is played by a man named Gilbert Saroni, who was this famous vaudeville actor. Vaudeville being, the style of comedy, minstrel acting. A lot of it was putting on and donning these different characters for comedic purposes. And Gilbert Saroni was one of the best at it at the time. And so when moving pictures began, he was one of the folks who translated those characters on stage onto the screen. And because we did not have language right back then to describe what could be a trans character, many of these types often fill in. And we can connect this movie in 1901 to a film 40 some odd years later called Boy with a Girl, or to another one 15 some odd years later called Some Like It Hot, that I'm sure many of you are more familiar with, in which men are dressing up as women, specifically for the purposes of disguise, to dupe and mislead people. Now, we all live in this world, and so we know that many people believe that trans women are just men in wigs. And because we know that so many people believe that trans women are just men in wigs, wrongfully, to be clear, I believe that this is where we can trace the sentiment about trans women being deceitful, right, to these types of media renderings, right? Because if we in society have folks who are unable to recognize the humanity of trans people, and therefore their only they're only ways they've recognized, right, these images in which they perceive men, quote unquote, dressing up as women are these types of characters, from Gilbert Cerrone to Boy with a Girl to Some Like It Hot to everyone's favorite Psycho, Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates in Psycho, your cross-dressed killer, that trope we see emerge. And then you have your comedic relief forms, right, of men dressing in women's clothing, dressing up as women, Dustin Hoffman and Tootsie, my personal favorite, Tyler Perry as Medea. If and when you read the book, there's a whole journey about my relationship to Tyler Perry as Medea. But these are all examples, right, of men dressing up as women. A few others you might be familiar with: Jared Leto in Dallas Buyers Club, Eddie Redmayne in The Danish Girl, Jeffrey Tambor in Transparent, I already mentioned. Good acting, beautiful gowns, as the legendary Aretha would say, but more men in wigs, which is a very different thing, right? For example, than Laverne Cox, right? Playing a trans character on Orange is the New Black, being a trans woman in real life, and being able to both embody the role and also speak to the truth of that experience on a red carpet, for example. But other notable characters of yesterday to highlight, trans characters, the Jeffersons actually had a really great episode when it comes to trans representation of the time back in 1977. Boys Don't Cry, Oscar recognized film. Soldier's Girl, which was a Showtime TV series about Calpurnia Adams and an armyman who was murdered by his fellow armymen when they found out he was dating a trans woman. And then we have a film like Trans America with Felicity Huffman in 2005. All of these images that I've just shown you have been largely men dressed as women playing these characters. Every now and again, you get a cis woman playing a trans woman like Felicity Huffman, like the character in The Jeffersons. And then even fewer times, I can note examples of trans masculine representation. All of these, right? Cis people playing trans character. But the thing that really gets my Black trans joy going is when trans actors are able to do it themselves. The folks that I like to highlight, first up is Ajita Wilson. Ajita Wilson, she was a, adult film actress, okay? So we count that. And my favorite story about Ajita Wilson is that she was a Jet Magazine Beauty of the Week back in 1981. For the white people in the room, Jet Magazine was a legendary, iconic Black magazine. Okay, and they had this feature every week called the Jet Beauty of the Week that, dudes would rip out that page, and put it on their wall. It was that kind of idolized feature in this historic Black magazine. And in 1981, a Black trans woman was the beauty of the week. Now, the world did not know she was trans. We would not find out that she was trans until her death. But the fact that Black trans people were out here living, moving through the world, being honored and respected in the ways that we should have been back then in a Black media publication, to me, I love that. I love hearing the story of Sandra Caldwell. If any of you are Cheetah Girls fans out there, Sandra Caldwell played Drink of Champagne in the Cheetah Girls. She came out as trans, I'd say about 5 or 6 years ago, after a very long stage television career, to show the world and claim to the world that she is this trans woman, and shared her story of why she lived without disclosing that information for so long. The Lady Chablis, fabulous star from a film called Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. Candace Cain, she was on a show called Dirty Sexy Money. becoming the first trans actress to play a recurring trans character in primetime television. When we start to see these types, right, of folks pop up in culture, that is when, you know, visibility takes on a new possibility, right? Because not only are we now seeing trans people playing trans characters, but they're also able to embody those narratives in a different way in real life, on a red carpet, in interviews. Now, but the I like to call them the MVPs of visibility for me. They go to the reality TV girls, okay? Those are your folks who you saw them on the Jerry Springer show, okay? Maybe you are familiar with Mimi Marks. Mimi Marks is a trans woman who was on the Jerry Springer show, y'all, a dozen times. She considers Jerry Springer to have been a friend of hers. I like to highlight Isis King, Laomi Maldonado, Jayla Sims, who are on shows like America's Next Top Model, Diddy's Making the Band. Chaz Bono deserves his own attention for the point in visibility that he was shouldering almost, you know, by himself for a period of time before Laverne Cox. I've listed all of these names for you because I want to show you the ways that transness and Black transness has shown up in culture before that quote unquote transgender tipping point. Because so often folks make it seem like, you know, Laverne started it all, that Laverne got us going. But the reality is that we've always been here. We will always be here. And I think it's important for us to note that. But the visibility is not just, right, film and television. It's also everyday life. I want to play a little bit of a video introducing you all to one of my IRL possibility models, Monica Roberts. Monica Roberts.
We have Black trans folks who are doing amazing things. Far too often, I saw Black trans victims being misgendered, using the words man and women's clothing, the chosen name of the trans person in quotation marks. I was fed up with it, and I wanted to role model what good coverage looked like. I felt like the history of trans folks, especially Black trans folks, wasn't really told. Griots in West African culture are oral historians who are able to tell up to 5 centuries of their people's history from memory. One of the missions of Trans Griot is to document our history, good, bad, and indifferent. And it has to be preserved for future generations to know about this.
Monica was one of the first Black trans journalists, probably the first Black trans journalist that I ever met. She had this blog called Trans Griot, on which she partially documented the life and experiences of Black trans folks, this history. I always say that when we get to a point in our media in which we stop misgendering trans folks, both in life and death, we will owe it to the work that Monica Roberts did, some of which was archiving, going into the archives and pulling out stories of Black trans people who existed in our everyday communities. And when we talk about Black trans joy, it's, again, knowing that these folks existed that gets me going in particular. My favorite story, because I know we're running out of time and I want to get to your questions. I hope you're dropping some into the chat, okay? But I want to highlight the story of Lucy Hicks Anderson, who I like to say is my cousin, okay? Because Lucy Hicks Anderson was a baddie, okay? She ran a brothel, okay? A really big brothel. It was a couple blocks long in Oxnard, okay? And, and her kind of claim to fame, the way we find out about kind of her history is she had some of her workers, okay, at the brothel had done some activity with some sailor folks, okay? And the sailor folks had went back to the ship with a little itchy scratchy, okay? And because of that, the brothel, everybody at the brothel, the police made them go through a medical examination, including Lucy Hicks Anderson. It is only through this medical examination that the world finds out that she is a trans woman. She's locked up, she gets locked up and all these other things. She ends up having to serve time for perjury, etc. But my favorite part of her story is that she also was a really good chef, a really good cook. And so there's a story of her being locked up and a really high-powered person in government coming to bail her out because she was supposed to cater this event that he had, and he just had to have her cooking. I love knowing that Black trans folks existed and moved through the world before times like now as a way to push back against, all of the sentiment that is out there about us just popping up with Laverne Cox. And I know that, this is supposed to be something light, right? And it is supposed to be, I hope you have laughed throughout this, as Tracy mentioned earlier. But what's really important for me to articulate for you all is that knowing this history for me has been one of the ways that I have been able to keep going. It is this history knowing that, Wilmer Broadnax was a famous, well-known gospel artist, again, who the world did not come to know was trans, or what we would consider to be trans today, until he died, right? For Jim McHarris to be in Ebony magazine saying that this is just who I am, right? And that he was who he, taking up that space and claiming those existences in times in which it was tough, that keeps me going. But the reality, right, is that, and I leave you with this, there's this GLAAD statistic that over 70% of people believe they've never met a trans person. And GLAAD says that because over 70% of people believe they've never met a trans person, that the film and the television that we consume becomes all that much more important, right? So whether it's Laverne Cox on Orange is the New Black, or it's Jayla Sims on Diddy's Making the Band, right? Or it's Mimi Marks on Jerry Springer, that is how folks are learning about us. Now, I like to take the statistic a little further and say that the reason why over 75% of people believe they've never met a trans person is because they have not yet created a place around them, right, by which the folks who are trans, who already exist there, right, feel safe enough to reveal who they are to you, to share their truth with you. And so I leave you with one question that I hope you think on after this, and that is, what have you done or what have you not done to show up for and support Black trans folks? How can you be a more active participant in cultivating joy and possibility for trans people, especially for Black trans folks? What resources can you incorporate into your classroom instruction? What images can you offer for your office or for your desk that signal some sort of support and cultural competency? What self-education have you not yet done, right? So that you can be able to show up for us, both when we're in the room and when we are not. I think we often hear and talk about allyship. I know that the young girls are now using accompliship instead of allyship as well. And for me, it's some of these questions that you all can ask yourselves to know what is important and what you can continue to do to make sure that the trans people who are already in your life and in your community feel the support that you say you are extending. And with that, thank y'all so much. I hope y'all took something away from that. I believe we're going to get to your questions if you have any now. I believe Tracy's coming back, or am I just reading them myself?
No, we have not left you, Tre'Vell. Thank you so much for your presentation. Yes, we do have some time now for questions, and we do ask that you place your questions in the Q&A. And we will go ahead and share those questions. And right now, I do see that we have a question in the Q&A from Laurie. Where is the most welcoming place for trans women in the US? And where is the most welcoming place for trans women in the world?
This is a really interesting question. And I say it's interesting because most of the data that exists is from the opposite vantage point. It tells you the most dangerous places, right, for trans people. And so when I'm thinking of the most welcoming places for trans women in the US, I'm actually not going to say any state really, because I think there's always trade-offs, and it's always dependent on what kind of trans woman you are. You know, there are certain trans women who in various spaces, right, because of passing privilege, because of community connections, etc., right, they're having one experience in, Malibu, perhaps, while a Black trans woman, right, in Inglewood is struggling to get employment. And so I think there are issues everywhere. I think your states that are, your quote unquote liberal, progressive areas are typically better. But I find that a lot of rich culture and community also exists in places where it's not great for trans people. I think about a lot of those Southern communities. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, originally. And baby, queer people, even in such a, conservative place, we have always found a way and made a way, and we will continue to do so. But thank you so much for that question.
Tre'Vell, my first question is first of all, that was a wonderful presentation, and it did have a couple of laughs, and I'm going to remember that itchy scratchy for a while. I'm going to ask this. For me, film and television is how I first saw myself. And it was Diana Sand's character in Raisin in the Sun was the first time I thought I saw a Black woman that was like me. So for you, what was the first Black trans character that you saw that was like, oh, I can do this, or oh, this is me, and empowered you and made you feel seen?
Yeah. Okay, so a convoluted answer, but I'm gonna get there, I promise. So my experience as a trans person, as a non-binary person, has been a, winding road. And it's important for me to kind of take stock of visibility for me at every stage of my journey. And so I first articulate and kind of give props to this show by Patrick Ian Polk called Noah's Ark, starring Daryl Stevens. That character of Noah showed me possibilities of what life could look like. I could have gay friends. We could all be Black and gay and living and existing and, going to brunch. Wow. And so I shout out Noah's Ark. I also, as I mentioned in the presentation, folks on reality TV are also pivotal for me because that's my safe place in television. And so I also shout out Andre Leon Talley and Miss J. Alexander. They both came into my life via America's Next Top Model. And then obviously I learned of their excellence outside of that medium. And so I always highlight those three folks for showing me various ways of possibly existing in the world. And then specifically in terms of like a representation that I feel like at least kind of holds and reflects my identity where it is now, I would say is the character of Uncle Clifford in P-Valley. even though the actor Nico Anand, who plays that character, is not non-binary, is not trans, I believe that what he is bringing to that character, the way they are writing that character, the possibilities that they are showing for that character in terms of, you know, familial relationships, in terms of having love as well. We haven't seen a character like that on television yet. And I hope that we see more characters like that that show us as queer people in our Black ass, country ass communities, you know, living and loving and thriving as well. Because all of us don't go to San Francisco or New York City. Some of us stay home, you know? And so it's that rendering is really important and beautiful to me.
Can you expand upon the differences between the man in the dress character and Black trans actors? Because for me, Black women are getting sick of the man in the dress, you know, Medea, Big Mama, because it feels like it's making fun of Black women, where Black trans women are celebrating all the different Black women in their lives, sometimes the uncle in their life. So could you help the audience understand more about that separation of that meaning?
Yeah, well, so I will first, you know, just hit the point, right, that a Black trans woman's experience is not a Black man's experience, right? And a trans woman's experience is not a man's experience. The characters such as Tyler Perry as Medea or Martin Lawrence as, you know, Shanae or Big Mama, you know, because he's done it a few times. Robin Williams as Mrs. Doubtfire. We can go down a long list. You know, I think at the core of it for me is this conflation between, I'll say it this way. One of the ways that I realized that these types of characters are doing harm, not only just for the women, Black women specifically, that they are said to represent, but also trans women, is when I realized that in my communities, the same jokes that were being lodged at Medea on screen about her hands, about her feet, about her stubble, about her chin, etc., were the exact same things Black trans women were hearing before they died, before they were killed, you know, in literal, actual things, right? These efforts to dehumanize them. And I think when you realize the similarities, at least for me, I could not divorce that impact. Now, there are those men who are often do those characters who say that those renderings are homages to the women in their lives. Like Tyler Perry says that Medea is. And yet also, you've also articulated the ways that we've seen people, Black women in particular, find those renderings to be limiting, stereotypical, problematic, et cetera, et cetera. But the difference ultimately between them is a trans person is a trans person, and a man dressing up as a woman, either to play a trans character or just for the sake of playing a woman character, is something completely different, because Martin Lawrence can take the wig off. You know, Laverne Cox cannot.
Yes.
And so that shifts, you know, the ways that we are moving through space, right, very differently.
Oh, but Diane, I'm going to give you room to ask a question yourself, but I want to stay along this theme just really quickly, because I need to get at Dave Chappelle for a minute. Because I think one of the things about family business, now I'm not talking about our family business, but Black family business, that we make excuses for homophobia and transphobia and saying that it's a joke. and it's not funny. It's not funny because people are dying. And when Black people can go out for Black men that are being murdered, but then say that it's funny, but Black trans women are being murdered at record numbers, I find that not only beyond painful, but contradictory. And of course, Black people, we are no different than anyone else than being a contradictory group of people. But this is just flat wrong. And Dave Chappelle has such a platform. And I see Black trans activists and actors choosing to not engage with him because I think they've decided to give him a good case of letting alone. How do you think he really should be dealt with? Should he be ignored? Are we causing harm? You know, is this hurting a community that we claim we love? How do you approach this issue?
Yeah, you know, the Dave Chappelle of it, it's sad because we as a culture at one time lifted up Dave Chappelle as someone who could speak truth to power through his work, right? What I like to note for people is that his position in the world when he was speaking truth to power then versus his position in the world now is very different. It is unfortunate that for many historically excluded communities, we feel like we have to find another historically excluded community to step on, you know, to distance ourselves from. And oftentimes it's queer communities and trans communities that happens to, particularly in our community, unfortunately. That being said, I just like to say to people, trans people know how to laugh too. We know what funny is too, you know. Like, I just think people make it seem like we as trans folks don't have a sense of humor when that couldn't be the furthest from the truth. Because like many historically excluded communities, right? You laugh to keep from crying. You laugh as a means of navigating and surviving a particular space. I could keep going on and on, but I would just say that, you know, I have put Dave Chappelle on the sick and shut-in list, particularly for personally, and I'm gonna leave him right on there. I bid him well, bless his heart.
Yes. Diane?
Yeah, that actually kind of gets at a question that I had, you know, related to the role of humor and comedy in social transformation, because, you know, there are ways in which I think humor and comedy can help to humanize and sort of also expose sort of the dominant, you know, misperceptions and foibles and get people to kind of self-reflect. Although I hear what you're saying too, Tracy, the ways in which humor can also, you know, be used to dehumanize. And so I know that humor is an important part of your own work, Tre'Vell, and I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about what you see as sort of the role or the power of humor and comedy in in helping to bring about social transformation as we continue about these topics.
Oh, that's a beautiful question. You know, I think comedy can be a powerful tool, right? And it can be wielded for good and it can be wielded for not good. And I think that I encourage folks to check out queer comedians, check out trans comedians, fabulous Black trans woman comedian Quay Tan, Queitan, who can show you comedy about the trans experience, right? That is funny, that is, you know, the social commentary, that can also, you know, hit that line, that fine line of comedy, and not be offensive, right? In part because she is of the community, right? So, you know, we all go through that thing where I can say it, you can't, okay? It just is what it is. It's just, I didn't make the rules, but
Social
I do follow
location
them.
matters,
You know?
yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And then I also think from there, we always have to ask ourselves, why is something funny to us? You know what I mean? And I think once we ask ourselves that question, then we get to the things of like, oh, is this a good joke or is this a bad joke? Is this making me feel good or and making me think deeper about an issue, or is it reaffirming some biases, right, or some stigma that I or this comedian has for a particular group? I think oftentimes we look at comedy as like superfluous and just like light and fun and what's the word, escapism, which I get. Listen, I like that, you know, hee hee ha ha like the rest of them. And also I do think that because comedy can be, you know, the thing that people go to when they want to turn their minds off, that is why we also have to be intentional about thinking just a little deeper about it. But you know, a little laugh here and there, you know, listen, it's how we all keep going.
Well, it's like I love that you covered that history because Lady Chablis was good at that, the double entendre, that hiding my candy, and you know, you could laugh at that, and very powerful at catching the moment. But there's a great question in the chat that would tie to that, about that history, about erasing trans people from history. Trans folks have been doing readings, children's book readings, probably before anybody else. And so we are in this situation where the right wing and other folks are trying to stop trans folks from doing readings, trans women in particular. You know, and so Laurie's asking, you know, why is that happening, or why is that still happening? And what is the importance of trans folks interacting with children?
Yeah. So it's been, you know, trans folks, some folks are also just drag queens. So,
Yep.
you know, cis men
Yep.
dressed up in drag, who've been doing these story hours for years at this point, but now they have become kind of the ire of the conservative and political right, religious right. I'll first recommend a resource for everyone, and that's a podcast called The Anti-Trans Hate Machine. It is a podcast done by Amara Jones, who is a fabulous journalist who also happens to be a Black trans woman. But she charts the connection between all of these conservative entities that are behind things such as the attempted drag bans, the infiltrating of the drag queen story hours, etc. And the reason why it's happening again is because I say it this way: the conservative and the political right are exploiting people's ignorance when it comes to gender, when it comes to gender performance, when it comes to sexuality, and they are weaponizing it against the community. What I mean by that is, when you talk to people directly and you say, oh, it's just a drag queen reading the story, they're like, oh, that's cool. That's fine. It's the Berenstein Bears or whatever, right? But the narrative that is being, you know, pushed is that these drag queens are teaching your kid to be gay, right? And or teaching your kid to be trans. TikTok is making your kid transgender,
Right.
you know? And to be quite honest, though, for many people, that unwakes a variety of fears that they have about the lived experiences of queer and trans people. When I came out to my mother, first as gay, then as trans, her concern wasn't that I was necessarily queer or trans, it was about my safety. Right? And so she rejected it. She pushed, she didn't want it, right? Her and every not one, just her, everybody. They didn't want it, not because they didn't love me or whatever, but because they knew how they, to be quite honest, treated queer people and trans people, and they didn't want to see me go through that, right? And I say that the conservative folks are exploiting people's ignorance and some of those worst fears, because talking about gender and sexuality in our families, especially Black families, especially families from other historically marginalized communities, is hard. We just don't do it. I just learned last week that my mother's godfather was a gay man. Okay? Who died of HIV/AIDS complication. And I'm just learning that as a fully fledged 32-year-old queer trans person. And my mother looked at me like it was odd when I said, "Why have you never shared that with me?"
Because we don't
You
talk.
know, we don't talk about it. And we don't talk about the generation of queer people, right, that we lost to the AIDS crisis, right? So many folks. Anyway, but
Well, that point, I think, is it was like one of the most poignant parts of the presentation, which is, and it's just going to stick in my head, like visibility without protection is violence by another name, right? And so that I think is such an important point.
Absolutely. And I think, and last thing I'll say, I know we have to go. Again, I don't think folks think of those types of things as violence. But when you sit down and you really think about the impact, right, that these images have, not just on us as trans people, but also on yourselves and your perceptions of trans people as a result, right? It's just not television. It's just not movies, right? It means something more and something greater. And we all have a role to play in creating and crafting this promised land that we say we want to exist in.
And that helps us to make a transition to actually the films and TV that you talk about in your book. I was very struck by when you talk about Boys Don't Cry. And you reminded me of what truly was the most violent scene in that movie, even though you are exposed to the violence of the sexual assault and the murder, but the violence is when he is exposed and forced to disrobe. So the power of that medium of film and television is important, but it's also kind of, that pushback. How do we deal with the pushback? How that is important to have those moments, but how do we deal with the pushback of like what a lot of Black folks are now calling in film and television Black trauma or porn, that the suffering is being done as entertainment instead of, Tangerine is a wonderful movie. It's also a tough movie at times.
Ooh.
And so how do we walk that fine line when we haven't told certain stories?
Yeah.
And those stories need to be told, good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah. I think the problem is, and I liken this to the issues that we're still navigating in Black Hollywood with Black representation, is that we just need more varied examples of the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know what I mean? I think the problem is most of what we have as the archive of trans representation in media is trauma stories. That is the bulk of what we have. And so when we see another movie like Tangerine come about that, yes, is beautiful in so many ways, but also has these Black trans people experiencing this extended trauma for 90 minutes, it's not as beautiful a moment for us as a community as it could be, right? But if we had, a Black trans comedy a la Living Single, if we had a Black, Black trans drama a la, with something Greenleaf. I don't know if y'all watch of Greenleaf. Imagine what else we could turn to and look to for other ways of existing and being handled, in the world, right? I think that's the thing that I often think about, because the reality is, you're right. We do need to continue telling the stories of struggle and strife and trauma, largely because people are still navigating those things, right? And also, despite all of the trauma that I have gone through and experienced in my Black trans life, I promise you, there's a whole lot more joy. There's a
Yes.
whole lot more laughing. There's a whole lot. You see what I'm saying? And so
Yes.
we need more of that, so it can be a counterweight to this history of trans, tragedy that we keep getting. And even more so, just to nail down on it real quick, the types of narratives we need more, I will say the trans women and the trans femmes have been, leading the charge with this visibility thing, right? Trans masculine, gender non-binary, and other expansive identities, could use a little extra boost as well, in terms of those images. And so there's so much more work to be done. And I think once we get to a point where folks are able to create more of their stories their own ways, that will, shift the balance beam just a little bit.
Now, you do know something about the Hollywood machine and this industry. Part of the reason why we struggle is because they want to see what they want to see. It's not always necessarily about what the audience might want to see. Now, Pose was brilliant. I don't think we've really learned from Pose, because we should have another Pose-like show going, not the same exact show, but that cast should have certain opportunities. Billy Porter should have gotten a deal. Janet Mock should have gotten a deal. But I want to go back to the shows you've already mentioned. Like P-Valley is one of my personal favorites. And part of it is because of complexity of the characters, because they're not black and white. They're many shades of gray, like the Big Teak character, who is not struggling with his sexuality. He's struggling with his place and space in the world as this gangster person. And that was so groundbreaking. And how many Black folks identified with him and have really captured that kind of sense of, maybe we need to think about people in a much more complex way, I thought was P-Valley's breakdown. But I also think Hollywood lets Katori Hall alone and lets her do that show her way. So how do we think we can get the industry to let Black trans folks do their things their way?
That is a great question that we are all still trying to figure out. And the reality is, the window with which certain Black people were able to do things their way within the formal Hollywood system was very small. And that is a window, a very much, post-Oscar So White, early 2020 window.
Yep.
To be quite honest. And so even now we're seeing a lot of the Black shows get canceled.
Yep.
The ones that were, greenlit in this moment of intense inclusion. And so when it comes to getting the industry to let trans folks tell our own stories, the reality is trans storytelling is still, I think they would say, uncharted territory. We don't have a transgender movie star.
Right.
We got trans people who be in movies. You know what I mean? And actually, you know what? Maybe, Elliot Page, with his level of visibility, it will become, right, our first trans movie star. I mean, he's got an Oscar. So, but we don't have many, I'd say we probably don't have to. And so what would it look like to have this trans movie led by a trans person who's not a movie star? Can you recoup the money back? Can you get the critical acclaim? Can you get the budget necessary to do, the good storytelling? It's a shit show. That being said, there are trans creatives out here who are doing it on their own, who are doing great work independently. Rain Valdez is someone who comes to mind. She had a show called, a web series called Razor Tongue. That is, you can watch all of the episodes on YouTube. That is really, really good. That is also an example of where I think storytelling should be going. I also want to shout out Nyala Moon, Nyala Moon. She is a filmmaker. She actually just posted one of her shorts to her Instagram. It's called How to Not Date as a Trans Woman. And it is a hilarious 15-minute short that you can watch on her Instagram page that I think shows, you know, the possibilities of trans people doing their own storytelling. And you can tell in the comment section how the community is responding to that type of storytelling that isn't, you know, filtered through some, you know, cisgender imagination for cis consumption.
Ooh, thank you, Diane. Got a question in there.
I just want to say thank you for all of the great resources that you are sharing this evening. And I'm looking to see if there are any additional questions from our viewers.
Because I can run with this. This is my heart and soul, and the people that know me and CFA know that I do my own reviews and have a good time. We had a good time dragging Mia Culpa. Did you see Mia Culpa, Tre'Vell, yet?
I did.
Yeah, Tyler.
You know, but the fashion was beautiful. And
Yes,
that's
it was.
what I choose to remember from that movie.
Kelly Rowland and my favorite Mississippi. I just, you know, Crooked Ladder, Miss Crooked Ladder.
It was so good. Another, I think, if folks are, you know, loving these resources, a documentary that you all should check out. In addition to Disclosure, which again is on Netflix, a documentary to check out called Kokomo City, that came out late last year. It's streaming now, or will be streaming soon on Showtime, I believe. But it is a documentary by Dee Smith, a Black trans woman. It is about the experiences of these Black trans sex workers, and in particular, the relationship between Black trans women and the broader Black community. It kind of hits at one of the points that Laurie had dropped in the Q&A about some of the fears that Black mothers might have for their trans children. But it's a really beautiful documentary that I think also is yet another example of, you know, what can be done when a Black trans person is allowed to tell the stories she wants. And I say allow here in quotation marks because Dee Smith just picked up a camera and started filming things. And then, you know, ultimately made this movie that she directed. She did the interviews, she did the editing, she did it all. And so it's really, really great storytelling and filmmaking that y'all should check out.
Well, tell us about your podcast. I mean, that's one space that podcasts are killing. We're killing with web series on YouTube. But what goals do you wish to achieve? And, you know, what's the point of your own podcast? And
yes,
I'd like to hear
so
that.
I've got a few things going on because, you know, I got to pay my bills.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned earlier in the presentation a limited series podcast that I did based on the book called We See Each Other, the podcast that I co-host with Shar Jossel, who's another fabulous journalist of trans experience that you all should check out. And that podcast really just expounds upon some of the things that I talked about today, other things that are in the book, some more contemporary and current conversations around trans experiences in culture. I also currently co-host a podcast called What a Day, which is a daily news podcast. Every morning in about 20 minutes, myself and my 3 co-hosts, who are all women of color, we recap the news that you should know with a little razzle dazzle on top, I like to say, largely because I'm there. And so that I'm on that show 3 days a week. And so if you're someone like me who's looking at the news and you're like, oh my God, I hate it, but you also
Yes.
feel a little, responsible to stay up to date, we try to do it real quick with a little energy so that we can all still go about our days and not, soak into the foolishness. So that's my second podcast. And then I just finished a podcast at the end of last year called Fanti, which I did with my co-host, Jared Hill, which is all about having these complex and complicado conversations about the gray areas in our lives, diving into like the nuances in the between space of, for example, episode we did on Tyler Perry and his contributions to culture. And so those are all of the podcasts right now. I also have another book that was
Yeah,
mentioned
let's
earlier.
talk about the new book. What is
I have
your
another book. It's called, where is
historically,
it? Called
yes,
Historically Black
Black
Phrases.
phrases? If y'all don't know what that is,
Um,
it's like, I ain't one of your little friends. Every
Yes.
Black person in the world has heard that in their life from somebody like their mama, their grandma, or their big mama or auntie. What is your favorite historically Black phrase?
Yes, this book, Jared and I, my co-host from Fanti, we came out with last year as well. It just won an NAACP Image Award on Monday, so shout out to us. And it is a dictionary of these phrases, like you just mentioned, like I ain't one of your little friends, that we have put like definitions to. It's beautifully designed. There are essays in the book about how we as Black folks talk. And so it's kind of we hope that it is like an approachable and fun and comedic way to talk about the unique way that we speak Black linguistics. And my favorite phrase in the book is actually a phrase from my grandmother, Dorothy Montgomery Holmes, who was a fabulous pastor in Charleston, South Carolina. And the phrase is, "You stood a rooster, don't crow no more." Now, I know I'm sorry for the interpreter, Sydney. I don't know how you are going to do that one, but thank you so much for trying. I appreciate you.
I see this book being a drinking game. You can sit up and guess what's in there. Like, what you not gonna do is.
Literally, listen, there's an index. My favorite part of the book is that there's an index. Okay. So, because I like to call myself a sociologist by training because that's what I studied in undergrad.
Then you are.
And so, I love an index. That the academic side of me loves an index because you could just zero in on the specific word that you are looking for. But it's really fun, and we hope that it is something that Black folks in particular will get, and like you said, create a drinking game out of it. We actually, for Black History Month, we actually made a live game show based on the book called Historically Black Phrases Live that we were touring. We went to DC, New York, Atlanta, and then here in Los Angeles. And it basically, this is a Black culture trivia game show that we came up with, inspired by the book. It's a whole lot of fun. Stay tuned, coming to more cities soon. But that is the second book. We're so excited to somehow have won an NAACP Image Award. That's like the Black Oscars.
Yes, it is.
For those unfamiliar. So yes, it feels very appropriate for me to be a Black Oscar winner.
Yes, congratulations. Well, Tracy, I think we're getting close to the end of our time.
Yes, we are.
Shall we go ahead and close it out?
Yes. Tre'Vell, I think what I would ask is, Claudia, is there anything you would like this world of faculty members and our wonderful, amazing staff who serve CFA with their whole hearts and chests to know that we could share with other people?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, in the work that I do, it's about helping you all and hoping that you all realize that in many ways you are the first line for so many queer and trans folks. And because of that, I hope that you are doing what you can to be a support system for them, to direct them to resources that might be useful. I often think back to my education, and I didn't have anyone who could, who had the capacity, who was able to support me in that way. And I know how pivotal that would have been to me. So I leave you all with that. Go help change the world.
Well, Tre'Vell, I will say,
Tre'Vell.
I will say from me and Diane, from the bottom of my heart, that I love you, sister. I
Thank
see
you.
you, and congratulations, and I am so proud of you. And keep doing all the beautiful, lovely things that you are doing, because we see you and we need you.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much.